Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. And today, let's continue our talk on Shadow the Hedgehog. Because there is so much to say about this spiky edgelord, it needs to be expanded into multiple videos. At least, I think so. Last time we talked about Shadow's original story through the games, now we get to see how one of the most well-defined Sonic characters is portrayed through the wonderful world of adaptation. After all, much like Pokemon, Sonic is one of the very few video game franchises to be successfully multimedia'd. Today, we'll be continuing our look at Shadow's history through the Sonic franchise by covering his appearances in the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons. Sonic has had many TV shows over the past couple of decades, but Shadow didn't make an appearance until the 4th series. Let's take a closer look at Shadow's TV debut and the show that would give Sonic his next big catchphrase. Gotta go fast! Gotta go fast! Gotta go fast, too fast, too fast, faster, faster! Unlike the other Sonic shows at the moment, Sonic X was an anime straight from Sonic's homeland of Japan. This wasn't Sonic's first appearance in anime, but the first one was...
You might know everything I'm going to do, but that's not going to help you since I know everything you're going to do. Strange, isn't it?
Special. This was his first big series in Japan. This show is pretty divisive among fans, but very popular during its run. The story revolves around Sonic and friends getting transported from their world to our world after a mishap with Chaos Control, which kinda gave Shadow a presence before he even showed up when you think about it, since he was the one who introduced Chaos Control into the franchise. But anyway, most of the show is Sonic and the gang adjusting to this new world and saving it at the same time, having adventures and forging new bonds. The first season is pretty episodic, but the second season is where things pick up. The second season opened with 2 6-episode story arcs retelling the stories of the 2 Sonic Adventure games. And as you probably guessed, this is where we get to Shadow. The Sonic Adventure 2 storyline starts in episode 33, when Eggman discovers his grandfather's diary when he hacked into Gun's database. The show implies that Eggman isn't from the same universe Sonic and the others are, but from the universe they ended up in, which is how he found his grandfather's research on Shadow. How did Eggman wind up in a completely different universe? Well, it wasn't in Sonic Adventure 2, so who cares? The best we get is the explanation that this world and Sonic's world are parallels of each other, but beyond that, it's never really brought up again. From there on, the story plays out very similarly to the events of Sonic Adventure 2, and Shadow's story is largely the same. He's still found by Eggman, his backstory is identical, and his powers, characteristics, and motives are pretty much the same from his appearance in the game, with one major exception that we'll get to later. Before we dive into the major changes in Shadow's journey in Sonic X, I wanted to point out a couple of the smaller changes they did make to this iconic story in this new setting, instead of going over each plot point again. Because while there were some weird changes, for the most part, they do a good job of incorporating this story into a well-established series. Like for one, the stupid people mistaking Shadow for Sonic plot point actually makes sense now. Not only is Shadow only seen and photographed in dark environments where it's kinda tough to really see his distinguishing features, but remember the premise of this show. Sonic and friends are from a different universe. Anthropomorphic animals are not the norm in this world. So when they see a 3-foot-tall hedgehog running super fast and people can't get a good look at him, I can't fault people for jumping to conclusions when Sonic was, at the time, the only thing on the planet that fit that description. Plus, Sonic and Shadow were voiced by the same actor in this show, so that adds a bit more to the duality. It's also clear that the circumstances of Project Shadow left a lasting impression on this world. In my favorite bit of extra content, we actually meet the man who killed Maria. No joke. It's a pretty powerful moment filled with the remorse that this man has felt for over 50 years. It was a bold move. And I know the dub cut out the actual moment the gun was fired, but I think just the knowledge that he killed an innocent 12-year-old girl is still effective with or without it. But we also get weird bits of expanded information, like this moment in episode 37, where Rouge confronts Shadow with the idea that he might not be the real ultimate life form. Now, they did do this in the game, which foreshadowed the Bio-Lizard, the prototype for Project Shadow, but that's immediately dismissed in this conversation.
But that was the prototype. I was the very first creature created after that one.
Ah, but it says here there were 2 capsules ejected from the Ark when the facility was shut down. Apparently, neither of them was ever found. And if those 2 capsules were never found, then how did you end up on Prison Island?
I have no idea what they're talking about or what they're trying to imply here. If Shadow didn't come from the Ark, then where did he come from? It's not like he was recreated by the government. No one had access to the files on Project Shadow. And I'll bet that Professor Gerald didn't have the resources to create Shadow from scratch to carry out his revenge. Even weirder still, the Japanese version phrases this conversation a bit differently.
究極の生命。
アーク閉鎖時に地球に投下されたカプセルは2つあったの。でもどちらも発見されなかった。見つからないものをプリズンアイランドに封印するわけにはいかないわ。
I can't find out if this translation is accurate, and the Sonic Wiki doesn't mention this scene at all, so your guess is as good as mine. The sub-version of the original scene I found at least makes sense, since Rouge is only theorizing that the shadow in front of her might not be the original, while in the dub, she pretty much states it as fact. But even still, both versions have this really confusing moment which doesn't even matter because it's not expanded on or referenced ever again. So let's just do what the show did. Call it a dumb scene, ignore it, and move on. But those are just small bits. For the most part, the show remains faithful to the original story of Adventure 2, including Shadow's involvement, even using some original bits of dialogue. But the biggest change involves Shadow and his moments with Sonic's new friend, Chris Thorndike. Chris was Sonic's first human friend and who Sonic and the gang had been crashing with since they arrived on this world. I'm not going to go over Chris's character as a whole because he is one of the more divisive characters in the entire Sonic universe, and instead keep the focus on his relationship with Shadow because that's the point of this video, and gives us some of Chris's stronger moments. Chris runs into Shadow during the prison island break in episode 35 and tries to get him to help prove Sonic's innocence, but Shadow is a bit busy to notice the kid since he decides to stray from his mission and rescue Rouge. I skipped over this part when I talked about the game for the sake of time, but it's very telling of Shadow's character. While he's wondering whether or not to save her, he flashes back to Maria, and it shows that Maria left him with more than bitter tragedy, but with some compassion that will influence him for the better. And the act of him rescuing Rouge is the first time he truly honors her memory, and shows there's more to him besides bitterness and revenge. Or he could be projecting and trying to make up for not saving Maria, but I like the compassion thing better. But Shadow's rescue gets a bit more complicated when Chris gets caught in his chaos control, leaving Shadow with the same dilemma of whether or not to save this kid or leave him to die in the explosion. He of course makes the right choice and transports Chris to the Ark, and let's just say having a 12-year-old kid on the Ark brings back memories of a certain blonde quite a bit. I actually really like how they incorporated Chris into the story. It's way better than what they did in the Adventure arc, and it gives Shadow someone to interact with while everyone else is busy, and prompts more flashbacks and depth to recreate his story. But the biggest moment comes in episode 38. The Ark is on its crash course, Sonic and the gang are racing to stop it, and Shadow is left to be truly reformed by Chris. That's right. Amy doesn't reason with Shadow, Rouge doesn't reason with Shadow, Sonic doesn't even reason with Shadow. It's the despised anime kid who gets Shadow to see the error of his ways. But not without struggle. This is actually one of my favorite scenes in Sonic X as a whole. While there were some clear edits in translation, which is very common in the show, it's still much more impactful than his turnaround in Adventure 2. Remember, where Amy asks Shadow to help, he says no once, she gives her little speech, and then he comes around? Don't get me wrong, it's still a memorable moment for Shadow, but he did change his whole perspective pretty quickly. Let's just say it takes a lot more convincing here. Not only is Shadow pushing Chris away during the whole scene in the Japanese version pretty literally and brutally, but it's not nearly as easy here as it was in the game. The back and forth shows just how angry and hurt Shadow really is at what happened.
Shadow, getting revenge won't bring Maria back.
So what?
How can you blame people alive today for things that happened 50 years ago? Can't you see it's not fair?
Don't talk to me about fair! Not after what happened here!
It takes more than one plea for help to get him to see things clearly. If there's one thing Adventure 2 did not do, it was show just how deeply Shadow was hurt by what happened 50 years ago. They focused more on his anger instead of his grief. Sub or dub, that comes across here. To tell the truth, I think this moment is a bit more effective with Chris. Just hear me out here. I have no problem with Amy's moment from the game. It's perfectly fine and it, gives her something to do in the game, but I don't think it would have worked as well here because in Sonic X, Amy isn't from the world that Shadow wants to see destroyed, and the people who ripped everything he cared about away from him in an instant are from. Chris is. He looks like the very people who both hurt Shadow the most and cared for him the most, which is probably why he's had such conflicting feelings about Chris ever since he picked him up. It makes sense to me why why Chris's plea for his own planet would make Shadow feel so strongly. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but I definitely think it's worth thinking about. And yeah, what Chris says that finally gets Shadow to remember what Maria really wanted is just as cheesy, if not more, than it was in the game, but that's just Sonic for you. I like the cheesiness, and I still think it works a lot better here, especially how Shadow processes his realization. No words, no speech, just tears, and a moment of compassion. Say what you want about Sonic X, but they nailed this moment. After that, Super Sonic teams up with Super Shadow to stop the Arc, and it is so cool. Although the Japanese version wins for adding Live and Learn. This final battle also introduces the concept of the inhibitor rings. Yes, those golden rings on Shadow's wrist have been a staple of his character design since day one, but Sonic X gave them a purpose. The inhibitor rings are designed to keep Shadow's power under control, so he can concentrate them better and not burn himself out too easily. Removing the rings will give Shadow a huge burst of power, but will also completely exhaust him afterwards, even to the point of passing out. This idea of Shadow having something holding him back was so intriguing that it was later brought to the games for a moment in Sonic 06 and has been used regularly in the Sonic Archie comic series. But we'll get to the comics next time. Just like the game, Shadow is left plummeting to his doom, presumably sacrificing himself to save the world. And to be completely honest, as a kid who wasn't great at video games, so I never finished Sonic Adventure 2 before I saw this episode, this got me in the feels when I was a kid. But also, just like the games, we're not done with Shadow's story yet. This season was originally planned to be the final one of Sonic X, but overwhelming popularity convinced producers to go on for one more season. And did things get a lot bigger in this season. After the events of the Season 2 finale, Sonic and the others found their way back home. So instead of being stuck on Earth, Sonic and the gang and new companion Cosmo travel the universe to prevent an alien species known as the Metarex from retrieving the Chaos Emeralds and taking over the galaxy.
Of course!
Okay, I'll stop that, I promise. Also, Chris is 18 now and found a way to Sonic's world, but the time difference caused him to turn 12 again, so he still looks like a kid, but is a lot more useful and much more mature. Just so you know. And of course, Shadow eventually returns in episode 60, where, again, he's discovered by Rouge on Eggman's ship. And I would go into how Eggman has him, but as far as I can tell, seeing Eggman keeping Shadow contained on his ship and having him be really wary of giving Shadow any information about his past is all we get. Japanese or English version, I assure you, I checked. So I guess we'll never know how he found Shadow, why Shadow lost his memory in the first place, or what he was planning to do with him if he could wake him up. But they extended the whole amnesia thing when Shadow does wake up and through the next few episodes. He sticks around and works for Eggman because 1, he says he'll tell him about his past if he does, and 2, he's kind of in the vacuum of space. It also doesn't help that Shadow doesn't have his inhibitor rings anymore, so every fight for the next couple of episodes physically exhausts him because he can't control his power output. But I think the idea of Shadow having amnesia works a lot better here than it did in the games. One of the problems I have with the branching storylines in the Shadow the Hedgehog game is that it seems to just have Shadow bounce around from one location to another, and because the pieces were different each time you played, it didn't really feel like Shadow felt the impact of what was happening around him, or what he was learning for any long period of time. That's not the case here. Here, Shadow immediately suspects Eggman isn't telling him everything, but he pushes away those suspicions in the hope that he'll help him get his memory back, focusing on his assignments instead of asking how Sonic, Chris, and the others seem to know him. But that approach only lasts him so long. The 2-part mission on the Metarex base in episodes 63 and 64 confronts Shadow with a lot, like the gesture of Chris giving him back his inhibitor ring sparking a bit of his memory. But sparking his memory isn't always a good thing. Later in the episode, Rouge mentions Maria, which gives him a migraine that almost incapacitates him. Those sparks of Shadow confronting his forgotten past are pretty effective. But for what's to come, I think we should address something else before we go any further. Back in part 1, I didn't really address how much Shadow is used by others. I joked about it because it's definitely there no matter what version of Shadow you look at, but didn't really go into it because I didn't think I had anything to say about it. But when confronted with this section of Sonic X, where Eggman clearly rescued Shadow for his own means, I think I can say at least a little about it. I think the way others tend to view Shadow, especially the villains, boils down to his creation. Shadow was built to be the ultimate life form, and even though he was made to develop an immortality formula, he was also designed to be a living weapon. So Black Doom, Eggman, and even his own creator just see Shadow as a tool for their own gain. After all, he was created to serve others' purposes. Which actually might be why Shadow became so fond of Maria, because she saw him as a friend. Not for what he could do for her, but just for who he was. She actually talked to him instead of ordering him around. It's why Shadow's search for his own identity is so important, because he keeps being forced into situations where he serves others. Even with his memory loss, he follows Eggman in the show because he says he can help him. But being confronted in this episode with the idea that Eggman not only might be lying to him, but that in his forgotten past, he helped and saved the people he's supposed to be working against, forces Shadow to make decisions of his own. Unfortunately, it's not quite the right decision in this episode, because when the time comes to decide what to do about the Chaos Emeralds, he keeps his loyalty tied to Eggman as he and Sonic transform to their super forms and... Hang on a second, I just realized something. This is the only Super Sonic versus Super Shadow fight in the whole canon. How is that possible? Sonic and Shadow fight all the damn time. Did it never occur to anyone how awesome it would be for them to fight in their super forms? This one only lasts a minute, but it's such a cool minute. In the end, Shadow does end up saving Eggman's ship and continues working for him. But after that battle, Shadow starts to question things more, and his alignment and role in the story takes a drastic shift after a certain event in episode 68. And from this point on, the edits in the English dub get a lot more frequent and egregious, so I'm just going to recap the story as straight as I can without pointing out the differences, so if I say something you don't remember, blame 4Kids, not me. Eggman is welcomed to a barren planet by a group of freedom fighters after Shadow rescues them from a battle with the Metarex. One girl in particular, Molly, takes a liking to Shadow, comparing his fighting abilities to a legendary hero known as the Black Wind. But Shadow isn't particularly fond of being called a hero. Ever since the battle at the Metarex base, Shadow's grown a lot more bitter at his position, that he still doesn't have answers after doing everything he's been told, and not being able to choose his own path, only following Eggman's. So the only thing he can think to do is lash out. This moment in the Japanese version kinda sums it up perfectly.
なんだか似てるわ。あの子。あんたと。
それは僕じゃない。
どうして言い切れるの？
僕には選ぶ道も目的もない。
But as Shadow accompanies Molly to get a Chaos Emerald, he starts to grow attached to her, admiring her vision of hope for her planet and her determination to push forward and see it through. Suddenly this is starting to sound familiar. So when the fellow members of the Resistance turn on Molly and join the Metarex, Shadow takes this very personally. And just as Molly is at her lowest point, Shadow is there to tell her to keep pursuing her wish for her planet and fights alongside her for about 1 minute before... Molly's ship is shot down by the Metarex, and it's not even in a blaze of glory or anything. She tries to stop the ship on her own, but barely makes a scratch, and the Metarex takes her down with almost no effort. I swear, this sounds strangely similar to someone else. If this isn't the most tragic moment in the show, it's pretty close. And it's totally in both versions, I swear. In an act of vengeance, Shadow takes down the entire fleet single-handedly, and at a makeshift grave for Molly, Shadow abandons his duty to Dr. Eggman and walks off on his own. You know, I'm kind of glad I mentioned Shadow's tendency to be used by others, because it shows why his time with Molly was so important. I poked fun at how similar this is to what happened to Maria, but it's a very easy comparison to make. And not just because they were both girls that Shadow liked who were killed, Molly was someone who admired Shadow and saw so much hope in a situation that was virtually hopeless. She believed in Shadow more than even he did, which is very similar to how Maria saw him. I don't know if this moment would have been more or less tragic if Shadow remembered Maria, but either way, it's one of his biggest turning points in the whole series. But instead of seeking revenge, Shadow instead seeks to continue Molly's legacy of a better future, to try and become the hero she believed he was. And for the rest of the series, that's what he tries to do. Accompanied by Rouge, Shadow travels around with a goal in mind, to stop the Metarex. Probably to avenge Molly, but he's doing it of his own free will, so it's still a step forward for him. For the final episodes of the series, Shadow tries to defeat the Metarex with as much force in any way he can. Mostly by himself, but like I mentioned, Rouge tags along, which was a touch I really liked. And one of those methods involves trying to kill Cosmo. I swear this isn't as bad as it sounds, but I'm trying to tiptoe around the spoilers that don't involve Shadow directly. It's not the best method, but trust me, he has his reasons. He dives full force into stopping Dark Oak and the Metarex for the rest of the show. By this point, Shadow has completely abandoned his pursuit to get his memories back. In fact, it seems like he never does. And this may be because Shadow found a new purpose without them. When I saw this for the first time, I was kind of disappointed that Shadow never really got his memories back. But now I realize that he didn't need to. To me, this is him truly putting his past behind him. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad Shadow got his memories back in the game, but the revelation of putting his past behind him comes from a recording of his creator. You see where this statement kind of contradicts itself? I like the idea of Shadow finding purpose and something to motivate him without depending on his past. Both approaches are just fine, but I find the direction they took here interesting. He's being a super brooding loner through most of this, but in the wake of the final battle, Shadow decides to work alongside Sonic and the gang to defeat the Metarex and save the universe. He proves to be a valuable asset during the last few episodes, and it is epic. Shadow even pulls off the last act of this final battle by stabilizing the impending blast and sacrificing himself again. Okay, did Professor Gerald forget to install some self-preservation instincts in him or something? Shadow is really bad at lasting through a fight. In the dub, that's the last we see of him, but Eggman suspects that he's still out there somewhere, and he's right. During the epilogue in the Japanese version, we see Shadow with a single flower next to Molly's grave. First, aw. Second, this isn't a bad place to leave Shadow, but I wish we actually got to see him one last time. The implication is that Shadow is wandering the universe on his own now, and that's a good place to end his part in this story. He's free to make his own choices, to not be tied down by what others demand of him, not even being tied down by a job like in Sonic 06. This is what his solo game should have been, truly putting the past behind him by not dwelling on it anymore. Whatever he's doing out there, it's his choice. But I do wish we got to see a bit of Shadow traversing the galaxy on his own, even for a second. On the other hand, there were a couple of loose ends in this finale. Shadow was just one of them. Sonic shows have a long, proud history of ending on loose ends and cliffhangers, that this is probably the most satisfying finale out of all of them. At least it feels like the story is over. Sonic X was by no means a perfect show, especially after 4Kids got their hands on it, but I think it really captured what people who came into the franchise with the adventure style of games really liked. Grander stories with focus on some character development and an emphasis on adventure and teamwork. That's where Sonic X shines, and following Shadow's journey is a great example of this. It's not exactly the same as his story through the games, but it's not supposed to be. In adaptation, things will change no matter what, but the changes they made helped Shadow fit in the story while keeping the spirit of what made him such a great character. So that's it. Shadow was a great addition to Sonic X, and no other show to this date. Absolutely no other Sonic cartoon has had an appearance from Shadow the Hedgehog.
So this is why you called me here.
Ah, fine. God, I can't believe I have to do this again. Okay. It's not as bad as last time, just power through this, Kate, you're almost done. Yes, because we can't have nice things, Shadow is featured in an episode of the Sonic Boom TV series. Now, the TV show is actually a lot more fun than the game, to the point that it's pretty much become a self-parody of Sonic itself.
Look what I found at the flea market! Dude, is that Tomatopotamus too?
That's the best one in the entire series! Tomatopotamus never worked in 3D.
Even if I haven't watched it in a while, and there are still things in this show I cannot stand, I have enjoyed it a lot more than anything I've seen of the games. So, naively, I was actually looking forward to the time Shadow would show up. And then it happened. Shadow debuts in the Season 1 finale, It Takes a Village to Defeat a Hedgehog. Once again, with no introduction, besides a pretty funny joke.
Who's he? He's only the second most popular character in the whole canon!
Yeah, don't properly introduce this character to the brand new audience that's watching, just assume they already know who he is. Give Sonic X credit, at least they set him up. Shadow is invited to Eggman's lair to join a group of villains who want to take out Sonic. And after a few silly team-building exercises during which Shadow is thoroughly unamused, he calls them all fools and chaos controls out. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this last time. Shadow still has all of his chaos powers in a world where it appears the Chaos Emeralds are not a thing. Look, I'm not saying you have to give Shadow as much dedication as Sonic X did, but a line or two between Sonic and the gang about their history with him would be nice. Just something to establish anything? Please? Shadow still has a snarky, no-nonsense attitude, and in a show that is pretty much all nonsense, it stands in stark contrast with his character. Now, this isn't a bad way to go. Shadow is typically dark and serious, which contrasts with the hopeful, optimistic attitude that surrounds the rest of the franchise. So trying to find a contrast to fit this new environment is not a bad idea. And there are times where it's amusing, like Shadow just standing around with an "are you kidding me" expression while Eggman tries to get him to join in games or take him seriously as a potential ally. And Sonic and Shadow's little spin dash fight was kind of fun. It actually looks like most of their other fights. But then he talks.
Your shoddy craftsmanship brings shame on all hedgehog kind.
Oh my god. This is where we run into the same problems we did in Rise of Lyric. Shadow just stands around so annoyed and disgusted at everyone around him and believes he is above all of them and they aren't worth his time he could be spending doing whatever he does when he's not sneering at them. Every time Shadow uses words like fools or buffoons, it's just jarring and for me, not a lot of fun to watch. And once again, he just leaves. No explanation, no motivation, he just leaves. Honestly, I did enjoy this portrayal a bit more than in Rise of Lyric because it had a bit of fun with the character and the design looks a lot better. But this version suffers from a lot of the same problems I had with Shadow in that game. And I feel bad for saying that because this is the most Shadow's current voice actor, Kirk Thornton, has gotten to do with the character. A lot of people are very critical of Thornton, and while I can see why from things like this, I don't think he's a bad choice. It took a little time to get used to, but I liked his moments in Generations and Free Riders, and he even has some lines in, no joke, Lego Dimensions.
Yes, I've saved the world a few times. Yes, I'm the ultimate life form. But that's not enough. The only true way to inspire people to live their dreams is through the medium of flower arrangement.
That's Shadow! They got Shadow! And it was even funny! Wow, that makes this the third time Legos have surprised me. Look, Thornton is a veteran voice actor. He knows what he's doing. I think he could be a great Shadow, but Sonic Boom just gives him nothing to work with. They don't give him any kind of range outside of annoyed or angry, and there's more to Shadow than that. Heck, there's more to any character than that. Actually, you know what? I think I figured it out. Here's the biggest problem with Boom's Shadow. What is his motivation? What is his goal? If he hates everyone around him so much, why is he even bothering with them? Shadow is one of the most deeply motivated characters in the whole canon, and he's been turned into someone who is condescending and snarky just for the sake of being condescending and snarky. And you don't need a tragic backstory to establish a character's motivation. Knuckles fights with Sonic because he wants to be the leader and be taken seriously. Eggman fights with Sonic because he wants to take over the island and Sonic stands in the way of that. Motivation is what drives a character's actions, but Shadow doesn't seem to have a reason for acting the way he does, which makes what he does and how he acts very confusing and kind of hollow. With that said, I know a lot of people really like the Boom series, and I can see why. What I've basically made peace with, the Sonic Boom show is supposed to be a very, very comedic take on these characters, almost self-parody. And in a parody, you need to exaggerate character traits for the sake of comedy. Sometimes this works, but other times it comes off as flanderizing for the sake of a joke. They probably do this the best with Eggman, who has already become a more comic villain ever since much more threatening villains have been introduced into the franchise. So here he tries harder, but is more pathetic, like Dr. Doofenshmirtz or Dr. Draken, and with him at least, it works. But I think with Shadow, they're looking in the wrong place. Why not make him the straight man to all of the comedic characters around him? That suits him. Even exaggerating his ego isn't a bad idea. That's how most fans satirize him. But as far as Sonic Boom goes, it just doesn't work for me. But this is all irrelevant because we all know the best parody of Shadow is from Ask the Sonic Heroes.
Hashtag Team Dark, hashtag recording the new episode, hashtag goals, hashtag the ultimate, hashtag the coolest, hashtag I miss you Kylo Ren.
But keep in mind, Sonic Boom isn't finished yet, and Shadow is confirmed to be appearing in Season 2. It'll probably be more of the same, but who knows, maybe it'll be better. I'll check out his future appearances when they come out, and if it's any different, maybe I'll do an addendum video, but for now, I'm still not a fan of Boom Shadow. Sorry. So as far as the cartoons go, so far Shadow has had one great appearance and one not so great appearance. But that's pretty predictable. Unlike something like, say, Transformers, Sonic shows are not the same premise each time. They are all drastically different from each other. Everything from the story to the cast of characters to the tone is unique to each cartoon. The only thing they really have in common is Sonic. So once Shadow joined the rotating cast, it's no surprise that with every good version of Shadow, there'd be a bad one. But next time, we'll be looking at something a bit more consistent and talk about Shadow's moments in printed media in the Sonic the Hedgehog comic books. Until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.
Hey!